Recording in progress.
Hello, everybody out there, everybody who's listening. You know what? Even those who aren't, somehow I just believe that you'll know that I'm calling out to you and maybe bring you into the fold. I am your host, Dwight, once again here with you for The Broken Brain, which is your weekly dose of psychology and culture and excellence. And in the pursuit of excellence, I am able to meet today with Brian Belt. I'm very excited for this conversation. I love to highlight creators and obviously those that are involved in mental health. And when they intersect, it's even better. Creativity is such a powerful outlet of healing. And Brian is a mental health advocate, an activist, health peer specialist. We'll talk about some of those roles that you perform, but also an artist and the founder and director of Mental Health Awareness and Creative Arts Gallery for New York University, I believe, if I'm following right.
It's Hudson, New York.
In Hudson, New York, right.
But I did graduate from New York University.
Oh, okay. See, that's what I get for cobbling together a bio from LinkedIn. I never know where which part pops up.
Right.
I'm real excited to hear about your experience and what led you to create this new nonprofit. I say new. I don't even know how new it is. We'll get into that. But thank you for being here, Brian. Welcome to The Broken Brain.
Okay. Well, thank you, Dwight. I guess I should begin with like a little history. I have a number of years of experience working with people with mental disabilities. I was a counselor at a group home for teenage boys with mental illness diagnoses. And I was a case manager at a long-term lockdown psychiatric facility in Northern California. And 4 years later, I was a patient in a lockdown psychiatric facility. And I was a patient in a number of lockdown psychiatric facilities across the country, including a psychiatric hospital located here near Hudson, Columbia Memorial Health. And I was involuntarily hospitalized there at least 5 times, along with all the other involuntary hospitalizations I've had. I was eventually diagnosed with schizophrenia, schizotypal personality disorder, and substance use disorder in 2006. And for years, first off, it was very difficult for me to open up to my therapist. I was given a therapist, and I was afraid. I didn't want to talk to him. I didn't want to talk about my thought process because I believed I would have been locked up for life. So I really didn't talk to him, and I knew I was going to be, labeled a nutcase or something like that. So I didn't talk to him. I just said I was fine. I'm fine. And then I got back to where I was at, and I ended up going on these wild excursions, and I believe the first ones I took off to China. And lived there briefly until they kicked me out. I got a job teaching English, of course, even though I don't speak a bit of Chinese.
Yeah, I know they have those programs there, but you found that to be, it sounds like it seemed like a good idea, but then.
I just wanted to get out.
Yeah.
Honestly, I just wanted to get out. I didn't want to deal with my thoughts. But I did eventually confide with him. But that was really just the beginning. And the way I dealt with my thought process was through binge drinking. And binge, I probably drank the equivalent of 30 to 40 drinks a day.
Wow.
So basically, I lived in a perpetual blackout um, until I came to either in a jail cell for public drunkenness and or placed back into another psychiatric unit. Um, and even though I had problems with alcohol and, experimented with drugs in my, earlier days, my young adult years. But that was more, I got carried away with partying, you know, I was having fun, it wasn't like I was trying to block out my thoughts. And this was very different. It was near lethal binge drinking on a consistent basis.
Was that another
Um,
form of escape?
yeah, because I just I didn't want to deal with my thoughts. I had just very dark thoughts, but mostly it was just I didn't have a sense of personal reality anymore. Um, and after so many years and hospitalization after hospitalization after you know this and that, being resuscitated a number of times, and my mother, God bless her soul, for she was able to she 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 didn't give up on me. She didn't give up. And I honestly, I think most every parent would have just thrown in the towel. This screwed up kid just doesn't, he doesn't know what he's doing with his life. But she never gave up. She never gave up hope, even though she ultimately had to like draw boundaries. I couldn't, be at her house. I ended up living in an apartment outside of the place. But she didn't give up. And even though I had in 2008, I had a grand mal seizure and I fell flat face on concrete in my mother's basement. I had to be airlifted to Albany Hospital. And that year, I was completely out of it. I have no memory whatsoever, hardly, of the year 2008. And strangely, when I did come out of it, I decided to go back to the same path. I ended up going back to binge drinking and doing the same, self-destructive behavior over and hospitalized again. I got out and I, I, my mother asked me over and she looked at me straight in the eye and she said, Brian, we need a plan. Either you move into a community residence or we need to plan for your funeral. And that really hit me emotionally. Mm-hmm. And I decided to move to a community residence. And I tell people I did it because of her. I didn't want her. I didn't want to see her in pain anymore. Yeah. And I could see that, I could feel that in that moment. And I moved into a community residence in Boston, actually, initially. And then in 2010, I moved into a community residence called The Hearth in Philmont, New York. And it's here that I really began my recovery process. I was introduced to a recovery program which eventually became a program called PROS. It stands for Personalized Recovery Oriented Services, delivered through the Mental Health Association of Columbia Green. And my first teacher, and these were small classes initially, had a clinical depression diagnosis. But he was able to turn his life around through college and different programs that he got involved with. And he became a recovery teacher. And he was able to wake me up. I don't know how to describe it other than he woke me up and snapped me out of my awful, self. I guess that's the only way to describe it.
Kind of the spiral. It was a spiral you'd been caught in for a long time.
Yeah. And he inspired me to follow his path. And ultimately, I learned these recovery skills. I learned not only recovery skills to help manage my thought process, but I also began to teach recovery skills to different peers in this program. Classes that I designed and developed, and I taught for many a year, but at least before the pandemic hit. And I became a fully certified peer specialist through the New York Academy of Peer Services during this time. And at the same time, during this time, I had also begun a support group, a peer support group at the hospital that the psychiatric unit that I had been involuntarily hospitalized so many times. And I did that. I began that probably around in the year 2012, and I did that once a week. And I pretty much just reached out to other peers there, in a, essentially a crisis state at that time, and just sort of spoke my truth and encouraged them to seek out recovery resources that were available in the area. And I kept doing that throughout this period until the pandemic hit, of course. And shortly before the pandemic hit, I was always like trying to brainstorm these ideas, of course, and to improve recovery, improve, acceptance and that type of thing, and mental health problems within the community. And one of the things that I realized were a lot of my peers in recovery had artistic and creative talent. And knowing Hudson is kind of the epicenter of the arts and, culture and that type of thing, I thought, I wonder if there would be a way to get a few of my peers, that are artistically talented to openly come out as artists in recovery from a serious mental health diagnosis. And honestly, this is a total pipe dream. I didn't know where to start. I didn't, how do I start it? And I had an idea of starting a nonprofit, and it's well, how am I going to do this? How do I even start a group? And I began with just a Facebook page. And I also connected with peers that I knew that were into the arts, and began to do exhibitions with a small group of my peers in downtown Hudson. Wow. And those are really successful. And I think we had 4 exhibitions over the course of a year before the pandemic hit. Of course, the pandemic everything went black.
Slowed everything down.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
But the one thing that didn't slow down as far as, my idea was, to keep, posting stuff on our Facebook page, that type of thing. And I had filed like legal paperwork when we first started in 2018, but I forgot about doing all that during the pandemic, and it was just a crazy time. But I kept up with peers, virtually, of course, and just try to keep my life going as best as possible. And I think everybody was trying to do that at the time too.
Creative outlets served not only the creation but the consumption of art in various forms was one of the things that got people through. I heard many creators of different media and different content that talked about the fact that everybody forgets about the usefulness of art until they need it to survive or they need it to understand the world around them, right? And then all of a sudden it's really and people don't always remember that. But
right.
This mostly visual arts that you were doing with this
It was mostly visual arts, only because that was typically the people that I knew were mostly into visual arts.
Yeah.
But we're open to any type of creative outlet, so to speak. And then it was 6 days after the Capitol riots, and I remember this vividly. Of course, everybody's like, "Oh my God, Capitol riots!" And I got this letter in the mail from the IRS stating that we had a nonprofit status. That was kind of blew me away because I almost forgot about filing paperwork for all this. But once we did have our nonprofit status, we were able to fundraise enough money to collect enough money to open a permanent gallery space. And that was kind of like, a huge deal. And we did open a permanent gallery space in downtown Hudson in year 2021. And we started, we had exhibitions of individual artists, and we also began offering free art classes. And most importantly, we started to build momentum in terms of attracting not only others in recovery that wanted to become part of the movement, I like to say. So now we have over 50 artists that we represent. And this is now we're going on our 4th year of operation, and we still offer free art classes. We have once a year large exhibitions at a much larger gallery than we're at, called Light Forms. And we just keep moving forward. One of the things that really helped us for our 3rd year is we got a portion of the opioid abatement settlement funds through the Director of Human Services here, Dan Almasi. And we really needed that because we, even though we had public support, what we didn't have was public finances.
Yeah, that's always the hard thing where the rubber meets the road, so to speak. That's great because I've heard of some of them, that settlement, that was a great thing. And it's always great to see something going directly to a cause that's making sort of right on the ground impact with people's lives.
Yes.
You, obviously your organization is. Yeah.
So we also, because, co-occurring disorders is, such a common problem with people with mental health diagnoses. Um, we also act as a resource for addiction opioid awareness. So that kind of got us, at least through the third year, and now we're at a fourth year. We do have some funding, we still have some opioid abatement settlement funds coming to us, but we're not at the level of being self-sustaining. And when I mean that, I mean, we don't have, this big grant money where we can like hire staff, sort of delegate responsibilities, even though we do have the infrastructure at this point. We just don't have the, I guess to say big money, so to speak. I mean, for us, it wouldn't be that much. Our operating expenses are basically about $24,000 a year, which
good use. Yeah, they make good use of that.
Isn't much.
Sure, no, not at all.
But I do see our movement being able to grow and really impact not only our local community, but nationally also, because there's such a huge need for mental health awareness and support. Because if you're not personally affected by somebody with a mental health problem, somebody, or somebody who knows somebody. So everybody
feel that way too. I always like to say, if anybody out there thinks that it's not something that's part of their intimate circle, they're not really looking or paying attention hard enough. And I'll throw in, I believe addiction is part of that as well. If you don't think it's impacting
Absolutely.
your life, it definitely is, if nothing else on a societal level. But if you glance around, you got people in your life or in your circle who are struggling or have someone they love who's struggling. And yeah, there's just too much of it for us to ignore, I think.
Yeah. So, I think, by coming out as, artists in recovery from a serious mental health condition, we do help to eliminate stigma as it relates to serious mental health diagnoses. And that really was my main goal, because that was the biggest barrier in terms of seeking help for me initially.
If it sounded like that was the biggest thing, is it sounded like trust was part of that too, of being able to trust the professionals where you were. And you worked in mental health before having some of these struggles, it sounds like. And
and I guess, I mean, as a worker, it was different.
Yeah.
I didn't really, I didn't really know what I was doing. Honestly, I was just, trying to, keep them under control.
Absolutely. And it's something that we have in common. I worked in a lot of similar programs to you when I was younger, and I actually got my therapy license and everything before I treated my own mental health issues. And that stigma is so pervasive that you can think that I'm beyond that. I don't even, whatever. And when I was told by a doctor, a prescriber, a psychiatric specialist who told me, oh, well, you have, amongst the various things I was co-occurring, he said, I think your main diagnosis is you have bipolar disorder. And I said, really? And he said, yeah. And I said, oh, like how, and he's like, you have all the criteria. You have all the criteria. You have all the bipolar. And it was weird because I immediately teared up. And then my next thought was, why am I getting emotional about this? I know this is just a, this is a, and I'm like internally preaching and shaming myself for having a negative reaction at the same time I'm having it. It didn't last really long, too long, but it was there. And he noticed and said, what's going on? And we talked about, the feelings of it. But for those of us who like, even with a belief, like intellectually, we've been trained to have stigma, I think, right? And to fear this identification with with something that has been one of the most helpful things in my life for me to know, right? But that initial feeling and that can be huge, and it sounded like that attached to a lot of the experiences you were having with treatment.
Yeah. And, I came to learn that, having a label of schizophrenia or whatnot doesn't define me as an individual, and it doesn't define other people. Whatever they may be diagnosed with, bipolar, schizoaffective, clinical depression, that type of thing, that doesn't define them as people. Just like, I have a cancer diagnosis. Well, right. That doesn't define you as a person. You're just cancer.
Yeah. That's right. And we look at how we don't often do that with other diagnoses, right? We don't say, yeah, I'm diabetes. Now we might say I'm diabetic, but that's a different turn of the phrase, or I'm cancer. But yet we slip into that as saying, well, I'm schizophrenic, I'm bipolar, right? Even just the language that we use. And of course, then you get into just how that stigma is perpetrated. And I was curious about, as you were talking about it, it sounds like when you went through the Hearth and some of those other community programs after talking with your mom, was that the first time that you had voluntarily engaged? Because it seemed like that was very different to voluntarily be engaged versus being pushed or forced into it.
Yeah, that was the first time I voluntarily engaged in, recovery efforts related to my schizophrenia and substance use problems at that point.
How long have you been doing art? Is that something that was always part of your life before all of this?
Actually, one of the things that I do is I personally, most of the art or creative work that I do is through video creation.
That's cool.
And I do like visual stylization of pictures, that type of thing, through I guess computer apps, that type of thing.
Oh, okay. So are they mostly images that you'll create some of those and then you put that together and?
Yeah. Like, that's very cool. I think GIFs, that type of thing.
Uh-huh.
As to our artists, most of our artists use traditional medium. They use watercolors, they use oil, pastels, acrylic paint, that type of thing. So in terms of what they do, it's more traditional. Mine's, I guess, it's like you would call it computer art, that type of thing.
Yeah. Yeah, that's cool. And I know, the use of those kinds of tools in blending is such a great use. I don't know if modern things. I follow an artist. He's a former guest. Steve McDonald is an artist. He's a good follow on Instagram. He came on the show years ago. He did some of those kind of adult coloring books, that people use for anxiety relief and such. But anyways, I followed him. He's using a lot of those kinds of tools. He's a big proponent of taking computer tools and then what is like ethically sourced, and how do you anyway, it's very interesting. He'll just use his thing now is he'll use as many different technologies as possible to blend and get something that's an original creation. And it sounds kind of similar to what you're doing is, I say that with my ignorance. I don't want to be reductive at all
Yeah.
about or comparison to something that I don't know. But it sounds similar in that way of something that is evocative and creative of an art format that's use of those modern tools. It's pretty cool. I like that.
Yeah.
It's intriguing
Yeah,
to me.
that's fun.
Do the artists utilize the gallery that you guys have? Do they usually create on their own, or do they meet and use the space there to create their art, or what kind of things
Well,
happen there?
we have free art classes there twice a week. And we have an instructor come in, and the class is open to anyone that is interested in the arts. And I think that's one thing that, makes our gallery unique, is that we have people in recovery from a serious mental health condition that just like to do art. And we have people just from the general community that, come in, they like to do artwork, And so there's a mix of, people that, have mental health conditions and those who don't. But the common bond is that, there's joy in creativity.
Yeah.
And that, when everyone's focused on, doing a project or doing their own project, there isn't any talk about, well, what did you do now? What's going on? And, what's your problem? And, it's, the focus is on the art, not the, psychobabble in the background.
Absolutely. It helps us process things differently, I think, and being able to visualize something and then create, and especially if there's it sounds like a strong community element where it's become sort of just a community art center and there's probably a crossover category, right? Those with mental health disorders, and we could say those who haven't been diagnosed, which might include some who don't meet the criteria, but definitely includes some who, and I don't know, I kind of feel like I'm one of those. I do think there's usefulness in the diagnostic titles and labels, especially if it has to do with what kind of medication do we respond to, or what kinds of things should we try to avoid. And I still think it's useful, but I think there is something archaic about the assumption that if you don't meet this list, then you don't need help and support, because at some level we all need help and support. And if we dig into our own lives, we almost always find something that is like, boy, I can't just do this alone. And that connectivity is important. What are some of your thoughts about the things about creating art that are helpful emotionally? Why do you think it is so helpful?
Well, it's a way of getting out of your head. That's one of the reasons why I believe it's so therapeutic, is that, you're working with medium, whatever it is. And, similar to like dialectical behavioral therapy, DBT therapy, the idea of mindfulness is that, your focus is, it could be really simple, just, painting a circle, to start. And that just takes focus and concentration. And when you're putting that type of focus and concentration into something, there's an automatic relaxation response. And you kind of get into a groove of doing whatever it is that you're doing, whether it be watercolor, pencil drawing, that type of thing. And I see people, engaging in the art classes there, and, they're not fretting over, their lives per se. They're just focused on what they're doing and just working, and, letting that that feeling take over, so to speak. Um, but
It sounds empowering when you describe it like that.
yeah, I know it's empowering, and one of the things that I do see is that there's when people have their artwork up there in a gallery in a very prominent space in Hudson, New York, is that there's pride. They have pride that their work is up there, and by having their work up there, I believe that they feel they matter. Whereas it's most throughout most of their life, perhaps they felt like they were outcasts, or they didn't deserve love, or they didn't deserve respect. They didn't deserve it. They didn't deserve attention, positive attention, and now they're getting it. And I do see like people in our gallery, and they're just happy that they're a part of this.
Wow. Is it hard for people to cross the obstacle of putting something out there like that? Is that nerve-wracking? And do you find people have to kind of work through that, or do most people just kind of respond to, oh wow, I'm digging it right away?
Initially, when I started this process, or building this team, there was a lot of hesitancy among my peers. It's like, well, we're having this exhibition where we're open about our mental health, and a lot of people felt uneasy about it, and I understand why. But that was my goal, was to like see if I can get a small team to like come out and say, look, okay, we're here, but look at what we can do. Look at who we are as human beings, not diagnoses.
Yeah.
And I think once that hesitancy, that that fear of coming out kind of dissipated, is that more people said, hey, they did this, they did that, and they're on this, they did this, maybe I can do this too. And slowly we built up our team. I mean, initially we probably only had 7 people that were willing to come out. But then over time it grew. Or our next exhibition, we get more people, and then more people, and then I'd start getting contributions from all across the country. I give huge credit to one fellow who connected with us through our Facebook page. Had schizoaffective disorder. His name's Jim Huff. And I just, I think I got a message on our Facebook page, and it's like, I really, believe in what you're doing. I'd like to give some of my artwork, to your gallery. Because I have schizoaffective, and I believe that it should be there. It's the right place to be. And a few weeks later, I got huge, like, stacks of cardboard boxes, and it was filled with paintings, artwork. I mean, I imagine there was a good 10 years of worth of artwork there. And I was like, holy cow, this guy is like giving up his treasure trove of artwork. And and he didn't want any money. He just felt like it was the right thing to do.
It lets you know how badly someone like the need of an outlet, right? The need of an outlet to share. And it hit me as you're saying that, because there's the pride of creation, but also the pride of helping too, right? Because there's a connectivity
Yeah.
to a sense of like, I made these, I want people to enjoy them and give maybe some beauty and hope.
Yeah.
Those are to me some of the greatest things of art, is the beautifying of the world. And I think I don't know, for me, it gives me hope to see people's creations as well. There's
Yeah.
so much that people do that's motivated by fear or selfishness or,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, we just continue to grow. I, we still have like a lot of momentum. Currently, we're trying to work out a plan with the Mental Health Treatment Court here in Hudson to act as a possible avenue for chronic offenders with serious mental health conditions to, maybe have the gallery and its activities as a way to channel or an avenue to avoid, jail time.
It's a great program. I worked with Drug Court for years in community mental health, and mental health court in my state was just kind of starting up. My last couple of years working with that agency, and I was able to work with some of the programs there too. And for me, it's such a relief to see some of those things even being initiated and embraced by the legal, because for so many years the legal system was the default treatment, kind of intervention, so to speak, and to actually see psychologically informed programming happening. But that's a great, that would be a wonderful link up to have that officially part of it, giving people this outlet to work with you.
We're actively working on that at the moment. Actually, we have a meeting tomorrow.
Oh, awesome. Oh, that's very exciting. I love the things you're doing. One of the things I like so much about the podcast is getting to meet people who are innovating. And the favorite story that I hear over and over from people who I'm lucky enough to get to meet through this is this concept of, there should be this. I'm gonna make it. I mean, not that that's that straightforward. There's a lot of hard work and time and evolution, obviously, that goes into it. But the creation of a resource, and then as you discover, obviously, it's like, well, here's a need. They're showing up. I mean, there are people who are reaching out. Personally, I also love the classes that you're doing. I think one of the biggest obstacles I see to people engaging in their own creativity is they don't think they're good enough or that they can. And having some mentoring and instruction, I think, helps people get over that fear, that obstacle as well. So I think it's great that you're doing that as well.
Yeah, and we provide a very casual, judgment-free zone, so we're not, if you come in and you end up just doodling a bit, and that's okay. We're not here to give you a test on your artistic abilities, so to speak.
Right. No, it's getting it, and isn't that a pure purpose anyway for creativity, right? Is to do it for its own, like, sort of for the soul, if I can get a little philosophical, I guess, for the internal, benefits that we get for the whatever people define that to mean. But well, I'm appreciative of you being here, and I really appreciate what you're doing and the work that you do to help people. And it's so great of you to take time to share it with us. We're going to tell everybody where they can follow your work and perhaps, even participate, donate, get involved. I always like to ask everybody first, before we get into that, for their own recommendation of what they do in their lives. You do a lot, by the way, of a way of giving back, but a different, like a recommendation of whether it's a cause or another charity or something that's near and dear to your heart, or just a good practice for people to do to connect with their community. Is there anything you could suggest for the listeners?
In terms of, I do know that, one of the things that helped my mother over the years manage her emotional health while she was dealing with me was through attending NAMI meetings, National Alliance on Mental Illness. And there she found the support and the guidance from others who, had similar family situations. They didn't know what to do. They didn't know what to do with their kid. They didn't know what to do. And where to go from there, And honestly, I believe she wouldn't have made it if she wasn't given that support network while she was dealing with my issues over the years.
Yeah.
So I do give a big shout out to NAMI.
And that's also something people can find. There's local chapters in each state that represent NAMI for those areas, and they do invaluable work. I'm glad to hear that plug for them. Where do people follow you, follow your gallery? How do they get involved?
Well, we have a fairly active Facebook page. It's under our name, Mental Health Awareness and Creative Arts Gallery. But if you're looking to view some of the artists that we have currently represented, probably the best place to go is our website, and it's easy to remember because it's stigmafree.art.
Stigmafree.art. Okay. I'm jotting that down too. I'm going to put that in the show notes for everybody. And that might be one that I revisit as well.
And mind you, I put this website together by myself. And I don't have, I'm a complete amateur when it comes to website development. But what it does, what it does do is it allows the viewer to see the art. And there's some nice information, resources in there also. But for the most part, you can get a good glimpse of, some of our artists on display.
That's another wonderful place to look. I'm going to visit that too. And in fact, it might come up. I'm going to segue this into each month here on the show. I like to pick charities or nonprofits that are doing good work in a local area. And so this month, actually, the focus is on getting the word out on an organization called Horses of Hope Therapeutic Riding Center. It's a nonprofit, to help young people. Centered in Puerto Rico and then Isabella, Puerto Rico. And anybody can go to horsesofhopepr.org to learn more about that. A lot of those types of therapies are often cost prohibitive, let's say, to a lot of people. But yet still very, very good experience people have with equine therapy. So to see that being provided to people who need that is good. And I'm always looking ahead in the months here and say, who's going to be our focus, our charity of focus? And so let's just say that the website stigmafree.art may come up again. I really love what you're doing, and I would love to make your nonprofit an area of focus here in a month or so as we get to that. And for any listeners out there, I'll just say, if you go to the charities that we highlight, go to stigmafree.art, also in this Facebook group. I always like it when we mention several per episode. If you do decide to become a contributing Patreon member, then when you join the charity that's being highlighted that month, 50% of your patron donation will go to that particular nonprofit. As long as you are a contributing member, that will always, the first of each month, I cut 50% of any donations and send them. It's become something I've really, really had fun doing and seeing those going out. You can, of course, go and donate directly to any of those things. But if you'd like to support the show and also get some of our bonus episodes that try to throw out there for people and help this to continue to highlight cool things happening in culture and in mental health. So that's my little pitch. You can go to dwighthurst.com to learn more about all the stuff that I'm doing with the podcast and with my practice for accessibility of care and such as well. This is something I believe in a lot. So, Brian, once again, this has been something that's going to be a great help to anyone who hears this program. Selfishly, I have had such a good time talking with you. You have a vibe that I just feel relaxed talking to you. It just makes me feel like things are okay. So that's something about your personality I really have enjoyed as well in this conversation. But thank you so much for talking to me.
Well, thank you, Dwight. Appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to the Court Arts Podcast Network. To listen to more Court Arts shows, visit courtamparts.com.